So today we are this is our fourth in the learning series, and we are going to continue to build off of the budget information from last week and get a little bit more of the Michigan specific information and have more space for planning and questions and answers. So I sent out and put into the drive the documents from the last session, which included both all of the Michigan budget materials and the program guide, grant guide, as well as two examples from Oregon, and which are not the same, but you can just kind of see how that SNAP E&T budget was filled out in a different state for context there. And then the other piece put into that drive are just some of the tools that were helpful in tracking some of the information that was needed. So that was what's in the agenda. Today, we're going to spend the bulk of the time going over the Michigan tools. So we'll hear from Lisa and team, and then we'll also have some space for planning, and then want to also talk about next steps and have ACCT review some tools that are available from the partnership with APHSA and SJI there. Anyone else on the team here have anything to add or anything I missed? Okay. So one of the first things, we just want to spend a couple minutes doing a little bit of an overview of for setting the context for how this collaboration can look between different providers. So one of the things thought would be helpful in going forward is really illustrating how this can work. So let me share my screen here. So one of the things I wanted to start with that I thought could be helpful, and this is very too hard to read, so it's mostly just the concept of it. But what I wanted to illustrate was when we were developing our SNAP E&T consortium amongst the colleges in Oregon, and then also figuring out how to collaborate with our local workforce development boards, with our employment department, and with CBOs. This is one of the first steps that we did that was really helpful, because it was the thing I want to really underscore is how different this grant is than most workforce development grants. So we had worked together, all of the different entities and different configurations. We had been contractors of DHS for some of the TANF programs. We were a subrecipient and a contractor, a vendor of the Workforce Development Board for WIOA or different youth projects. We had worked with and subcontracted with some of the community-based organizations. So we're used to that kind of partnership, but we really needed to step back and think differently for SNAP E&T, so for FAT Plus. So this just shows, it's this very like 2015 low graphic flowchart. But what I want to highlight is you see all these arrows going everywhere. And it looks crazy here, but for a participant or a student, this would really worked well. So what this meant is that instead of the usual way grants work, where you have to enroll one person in one program and then you try to match resources, this was a way where a person could be served and continue to be enrolled in multiple programs, which was the reality of how they were navigating resources anyway. So an example here is someone from Central City Concern, which was a community-based organization. They also had an American Job Center at their organization. And so a person could walk into their door, and this is a real example of what worked, and they would get screened and do an assessment from the Work Source Center is what it was called here. They could get referred in, and they were already accessing services at Central City Concern. So they're accessing case management, they're accessing job search training, and then they would get referred into the college's, one of the CTE programs that was very, felony friendly, and that was also high wage, high demand. So it was a welding program. And then what we all did as the three organizations figured out what we were all paying for the participant and what we were enrolling the participant in within ENT. So it was complementary and not duplicative. So just want to illustrate this and thinking about it. It was a very different way. And this is, I saw partnerships really build in a different way than had historically. It also was one of those realities that all of us were leveraging our own funding and really using that for reimbursement. So just want to start there when you're thinking of how to map this out, especially as you start to scale in a region. This was in 2015 and there were 4 providers in that area. I think now there's probably close to 40. So it's just really good to kind of figure out how to do this from the participant lens. And then this is kind of another illustration of that, just potentially what could work. So you have the person who's working with the workforce provider. So the might be the employment department, labor agency, or the local workforce development provider. So at the American Jobs Center, WorkSource Center, CBO, a community college. And you can kind of see those examples of what each provider could be enrolling the participant in. And then on the right in the green are different things that each of those providers could be reimbursed for. And so just want to really illustrate that this is just a very different way of working together that really serves the person. And I think it really benefits all of the different entities in addition to the student you are serving. Before I move on from this one, Mark, do you want to talk about a couple of examples you saw too, just in your work here as well?
Yeah. So when I was working at one of the colleges in Oregon in supporting adult education students, early COVID, they had a strong partnership with their workforce development board in connecting the SNAP ENT grant. And what we did was really come together and identify opportunities to increase referrals from the American Jobs Center into college programs, including adult ed, GED, ESOL prep, in addition to career pathways CTE programs. And in doing that, we mapped out who could really pay for what with which resources, and recognizing that there was a SNAP ENT grant through the college, then we were able to pay for certain costs related probably more so to the coursework and the academics. And then the Workforce Development Board through the American Jobs Center and their contractor was able to pay for supplementary resources, recognizing again, we couldn't duplicate services, so different services, but just covering those costs for students through SNAP ENT, but also other funds that were available. In this case, the college had a American Association of Community College Metallica Scholars Grant, so that was a supplementary resource. And then the Workforce Development Board had other, DOL grants. So that was one example. But having worked with other colleges across the state, we have other ones where the college has been able, just another scenario, the college has been able to pay through their SNAP ENT for books, fees, tuition, while the Oregon Employment Department that had their own SNAP ENT grant, as Kate referenced, could pay for then transportation. Internet has been a big one over the last few years. So just identifying what the financial challenges are for students, and then collaboratively and complementarily, if that's a word, addressing those across agencies without duplicating services. So just sort of college examples of what Kate's slides there illustrate.
Yeah, thank you. And it really was, I think it was just really changed how providers and colleges, like workforce providers and colleges and CBOs and the local workforce development board were working together. And one college sent me a chart. One of our rural community colleges sent me a chart when I was in my prior role that just showed like how much funding they had leveraged and how it had really shifted to how they were making investments. And so their employment department was paying for things through their STEP grant. Their WIOA provider was paying for things, some through their STEP grant and some through WIOA. And then the college was leveraging their SNAP dollars. They were investing some and then investing other resources too that weren't necessarily reimbursable with STEP. But I think it really shifted things. And I think some of the smaller rural colleges have really seen huge resource changes going to their students because of this. So just wanted to just encourage this kind of mapping and thinking that is, and just it is really different than most other grants. And it took us a while to kind of figure out how to navigate all of this. One of the things that I wanted to just give an example to, and certainly this would need to be driven by Dawn and Lisa and what makes sense there and want Michigan examples. But one of the things we did eventually figure out that was getting in our way was around training specifically and trying to figure out if the workforce provider or the employment department referred someone into the college, and sometimes they paid for tuition because they had specific state grants. We were trying to figure out then how did the college also enroll the student, and continue to serve them. So this is a link to and I'll share these PowerPoints afterwards, to the DHS SNAP 50/50 manual. And so one of the things we figured out with FNS and approval there was how there could be two different providers, one who might be funding vocational training and one who would be providing vocational training, and then both could get reimbursed for that and some of the and the costs around that, and then sharing the outcomes. So there's just lots of ways, I think, too, if you run into hurdles where you're trying to figure out how to both serve one student in a complementary manner, there's just some great solutions out there. And I think a really great way to be student-centered in how different providers can braid together funding and resources. So just wanted to set that context, and just as a reminder that it is a very different project, which I think is one of the things that makes it really impactful. And so it takes a little bit of planning to map those things out, but wanted to encourage you all with that, because it has made a profound difference in many states. And so with that context set, want to turn it over to Lisa to be able to kind of add any context there, and then also be able to start diving into the Michigan specific examples. And so I guess before we do that quickly, are there any questions that have come up about any of this section? Comments or anything else anyone on the team wants to add?
No, I put in chat that I think that when I went through your material, that was awesome. Seeing the funder, the provider, and actually I just had a conversation with one of our MWAs this week, and we did kind of talk about that briefly because I had read about it in your material prior. So that sparked it for me. I really appreciate that.
Great. Well, and it was I think an example of like a collaborative decision making. Like it was an issue for the colleges, it was an issue for our equivalent of MWAs, and it was an issue for the Oregon Department of Human Services, because they're like, let's just serve people already, right? And like, we want to reimburse you both. So I think that's the one thing too, is like, then we all met with FNS and kind of explained how it wasn't duplicative, and here's what we were each doing, and they approved it. So I think that's the other thing, is there's the ability to do that. Precious, go ahead.
Yeah, Kate, I was just wondering if you saw the potential for overlap of services. Is that most common when a reverse referral is done, where the workforce agency is referring individuals to the community college?
That's a great question. I think it went both ways, actually. In one of the areas, the community college, and it's set up differently, right? So in Michigan, that will be the process, certainly, because it will go, the referrals will come through the MWA, or enrollment will, I should say. But for us, one region specifically, the colleges were referring a lot into the equivalent of MWA, and into the employment department, because they had an abundance of certain funding streams they wanted to spend down. In other areas, it was definitely more so coming from the equivalent of MWA into the college. And I would say across the state, there was definitely, regionally, it was very different, that sometimes it was, sometimes majority of the individuals who were enrolled in the program were already receiving SNAP. And then in other areas, it was that students were identified who could benefit from it and were referred in to get onto SNAP. So kind of a mix of those things. But I do think the provider funder solution was great. And there was also the option that you could be both a provider and a funder, which was really important for the colleges, because a lot of times, we would be doing both, providing the training, but paying for elements of it. But that would still allow another entity to be the, the funder as well, if they're paying for certain portions.
That's helpful to know. I was just curious about where you most saw the overlap of services potentially, so that colleges could anticipate it. But it sounds like there just really needs to be clear communication between the college and the MWA to make sure there's not duplication of service.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it is very locally based, which is why those local partnerships are so important, and figuring and kind of mapping out that planning and starting small, right? It wasn't like we were trying to co-enroll everyone in like 7 different programs all the time. But where we really started doing it is we tested out in one program area. So we tested out, like, we had a really great maritime welding program that had really high pay when it was done. It was really accessible. And so we use that to partner with some of the other providers who were serving individuals who are justice impacted or had issues before accessing college. And so that was where we piloted some of the logistics, and then we scaled it out too.
Okay. Thanks, Kate.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to turn it over to you, Lisa, to walk us through.
All right. So, we want to talk about the budget, and I'm not quite sure how to display it. So I put it into some PDFs that I think will be easier for me to navigate so everybody can see it blown up. It does start with an Excel document. That's what it is when it goes out. So that's actually what I'm going to share. I'm going to kind of switch my screens here a little bit so that you guys can see it blown up. I think that might help. Find the share feature. Okay. All right. So, oops. Okay, so let's see if I can move this out of the way. Yes, there, that helps. So anyway, so it is an Excel document, and it comes with a total plus budget. Like, I'm going to show them to you in a PDF so I can zoom in. And it's got the plus budget, which is going to be the overall end result of your budget. It's got a cost allocation plan. It's got a tab for supportive services. There's a tab for subsidized work-based learning that wouldn't be as useful at a community college right away, but in other organizations. And then I've just put a couple tabs down here. I put a sample vocational training and a sample work readiness. And then the real budget actually has about 10 tabs, because we have some organizations that offer quite a few activities. So because of that, we keep the spreadsheet the same for everything. Everything ties together. So I am going to switch it out and see. Okay. Yeah, I'm going to see if I can blow these up a little. So I wanted you to have a visual of really what's all on it. And I'm just going to blow it up a little bit so that we can look at them a little bit easier. But I wanted I wanted to also talk about when we think about our budgets. I know we've mentioned this before, that the budget in the end, it's just going to represent the costs that are associated with serving those plus students with your non-federal dollars. So the budget isn't the total cost of what it is going to cost to train this student or all students, right? And so I think it's really important that the Michigan Works agencies are working close together with the community colleges when they're developing their budgets, talking it through, so that we understand what the total cost is coming from, so what your total cost of that training is coming from. But maybe there's some things in that training that you can't include in your budget because it wasn't paid for with non-federal funds. Or maybe there happens to be a disallowed cost from F&S perspective that you can't include in your training. So those things would be taken out. Anything that's not non-federal, anything that would be disallowed, you're going to come down to this dollar value. And then you're going to say, okay, so this is what it's going to cost to, like the welding component that Kate was just talking about. This is what it's going to cost to provide that for each student. Now, my typical class size, if I'm going to look at a quarter, I run this class how many times a year, but my typical class size is X, and what percentage of the participants do I believe will be plus eligible students and will agree to want to participate in plus. So you're bringing that down. So as long as everybody remembers, this is the end result that I'm showing you. But really what you're going to be doing is you're going to be starting out with a larger budget that you're going to be talking to everybody with. So I just want to make sure, because of my screens, that everybody can see. So Kate, if you can just say something, because I don't see the same screen that I do when I'm on a Teams. Can everybody see the plus budget?
They can, and Steve has his hand up too. So I'll
Okay.
help do chat and
Yeah,
monitor that.
thank you, because I'm actually
Yeah, I know it's hard to do all. Yeah.
Thanks,
Yeah, that's
Kate.
fine.
And I think, Lisa, this is what you were just talking about, but so would you recommend, and Kate, this might be for you and Mark as well, but would you recommend building out your entire program budget with all the included costs and then go through and sort of pull out, so you're not working with like you're not working with two separate, trying to only create a budget with just like thinking about, okay, is this going to be, allowed or not allowed? So should you start with an overall budget for the entire thing and then go through and pull out those costs that would be with non-federal and that you're going to apply to the SNAP budget?
I think that makes perfect sense. I know when we received our technical assistance, several years ago, it was like, yes, create that budget, do that original budget of what this component costs you. And then, and then set it aside, right? You have it, and then that's your true backup to say, this is, so our budget for plus, reasonable and necessary, because this is our true cost. And then you're starting to pull the stuff out. I think that is the way to do it. I don't want to say there isn't another way that can be done, but that's what makes sense to me, that's what you would do. And then you've got as the college or any CBO would have their supporting documentation to say, yep, this is what it costs me, but this is what I'm budgeting for plus based on those, the criteria we just talked about.
Yeah, I think that's helpful. It just seems like it would prevent people from getting confused, like, where did I include that number for this particular expense? So,
and I think that right there is what's so important, because these budgets, go up the food chain a bit, right? So we lose that conversation. And so when it hits the state, majority of the review's been done. The Michigan Works agencies are the one, but so if I look at something and it just seems off, it just doesn't seem right, that it requires me then to reach out and go, wow, this class normally costs a lot more. Why is it so less expensive here? well, then they can, they can share that and they'll know, well, it's due to their non-federal, and they may actually put that in. And I would suggest that the MWA would provide that information when they're submitting the proposal to explain a little bit about why the cost may be different than when they've submitted proposals for other organizations. That's always really helpful because, when that goes to Department of Health and Human Services, they're going to have, they would have the same question. So anything that we can do, and that's what we ask the MWAs to, I put it in there that the MWAs really need to understand what goes into that budget so that they can explain it if there are those questions. So yeah, it does feel like it's a lot of work because it is 2 steps, but I really think it takes away confusion in the end and really does clear up things, and it makes it faster to get things processed. So,
And Lisa, can I
Go
add
ahead.
2 quick things for that? I think one of the things that is important for colleges is that clearly one of the main expenses is faculty. But if you are charging tuition, like tuition covers the cost of faculty, so faculty should not be in your budget. And so I just want to clarify that when you're thinking of your total cost, faculty could be in your budget if they are providing enhanced support or advising to students, but you can't, there were a lot of issues that came up with some states that had faculty, they were charging for faculty and they were charging for tuition. And so that would be, when you're thinking of your total cost, that should not be in there. And so the way I thought of always doing my budget is I'll just use my example, myself as an example, because it's simple. So, I had the career pathways department, knew what my total costs were, knew generally how many students we served. And so the way I approached it is I looked at, okay, what percentage of our staff time and effort is going to be devoted and allocated to this, and then would calculate that accordingly. How many of our students are eligible? And that then how much are we going to pay for tuition and bus passes and things of that sort? And then what's the indirect related to that or any additional costs? So that's kind of how I built it, and looking at the whole and then doing a percentage of it. And then I would take out faculty costs for any of that. There are some scenarios where if you have a class that's entirely for your FAET, you run a cohort, you're not charging tuition, you could potentially do that. I would advise against trying to do any of that your first year, but I just want to put that out there. There are some options for that, but I think that is the big one. The other big one that gets in the way is if you provide GED services free for everyone in your community, you cannot add that in here. And the other big one, similarly, if you pay for GED tests for your students, those or any other kind of fees, those should not be in here. So just want to flag that so those don't get in there. And then you take it up the chain, like you said, and end up with some no's.
So I love that. And that was really good for me because look what I just put up there, right? So we are going to change this. See if we can do this. We're going to take the word community college out of what I just, out of my organization name. So since we don't have any community colleges, we have not done any budgets with tuition. So sorry about that. So we haven't had any. So when I was just creating one from an example of an organization that put through a training, this is a class that isn't done on a tuition basis. So this is paying for a class where they are charging for their instructor because there is no tuition. So, and a lot of your community-based organizations and stuff aren't going to work on a tuition basis like a college. So really good one. We're going to take that out so nobody gets, now that you've all seen community college up there, I'm glad Kate was able to help us with that. That's why it's always so nice to have somebody who's done this before. So, and I think in the chat, there was a question from Mary from GST asking about, so how do we equate the CNA 5,000 as a cost? And I think this kind of comes up, I'll set that aside, but I want you, Kate, to kind of think about that. MWAs work with training providers and they just pay, they, will pay the cost of the training. So I'm not sure. That may be different because it may be sitting out if it sits outside the community college realm. So And Susan. So anyway, so we're gonna move forward. So on here, subsidized work-based learning, I mentioned when I showed you the Excel spreadsheet that it is on the worksheet. It's not going to be in what I'm showing you here. We at Michigan has not been approved for subsidized work-based learning. With ENT dollars, we've gotten subsidized work-based learning, just not with ENT dollars. So that just means that we're not reimbursing the funder for the wages for the customers or the clients. So when we look at the overall budget, just simply it is bringing everything together from your slide, from the individual budgets for the activities, and you're going to see it on the front page. You're going to see the amount of activities, and this, I don't know how necessary this is. It just kind of gives you an idea. It's not a true cost per, it's just doing a simple math calculation for what the total costs are and how many participants. Okay, so that's just there just to kind of give us an overall visual. The biggest piece at the bottom of the first page is just really talking about the assurances. That these are the things that the MWA will ensure that all of their proposals have, you know, that your budgets, like we just talked, your budgets only include those for FA&T plus. It doesn't include any in-kind costs. And like Kate mentioned, like if GED is provided to everybody in your community for free, you're not going to include those. And it could be something else that is provided to all students at no charge, and there is no, you know, it comes from a state kind of mandate thing. So, you know, we're looking at, you've decided, you've made it clear what budget costs are direct or indirect, and so that you're not budgeting those twice. And we're making sure that the non-federal funds that you're using are not being used for a match for another program. We have two questions about supplanting, and I don't want anybody to look at these and say that these were great, you know, for sure examples. Everybody would write something different, but you know, to determine that you're only charging plus what you would charge any other organization. The students that are coming through plus aren't being charged more, in theory, being charged more than another student, and that you're you know, you're not supplanting. So this is really just to make sure that the proposal has everything and everything has been addressed. And it's the one pager that just kind of looks at everything as a whole. This cost, so the first tab is cost explanation. And this is where it's really important that you could, you know, talk about, and I would suggest that you talk about any of those things inside your budget, as far as, you know, that is really important, that things that you know, took out. You know, this is just an opportunity to do that, even if you have to do it, you know, you can add comments down below. This is all free form. It's not locked down at all, as far as you can open this as wide as you want and type as much material in here as you want. So I'm not a fiscal expert. You know, you can read the instructions, and that's really, I mean, you guys just use it to the best of your ability to be able to share how you determined your costs. So I wanted to point out that there's another tab, that the next tab is specific to supportive services. So there's going to be situations where everybody who comes into Plus is provided the same supportive service or offered it, and it's not associated with any activity. So maybe all activities, you know, especially in a college situation, if they're all coming to campus, everybody would be allotted opportunity to receive transportation assistance. So you don't have to budget this out to a specific training or work readiness or anything. You could just go ahead and put it inside the supportive service tab. And if it was available for all your participants, it would just be assigned here. So we just have a separate tab that you can just put any supportive services that are are going to be available to all students, no matter what they enroll in. So the actual activity budgets are 2 pages, just because not in a spreadsheet, but if you were to print them out, so they're quite lengthy. This gives everybody just space, hopefully enough space to enter in the information. I should have mentioned it even earlier. You only complete the green highlighted fields. Everything else, all the white fields are the calculations, the locked fields. The MWA, so when we get to the activity, we really want our partners to just tell us what they call their activity. So you've entered your college name in on the first page, and you've selected a budget year. Unfortunately, you do have to select the budget year on every page. I have not, unless somebody can, there's a master at, I don't know, now I'm thinking there is a way to do it, but currently I do believe you have to select your budget year on each one because it's a drop down. But your college, no, I'm sad that I put that there. Anyway, organization name is there, and we'd like you to put what you consider your activity. And so, I have this information technologies class would then transfer over to vocational training. These are all drop downs that are in the blue that you can pick from. That's actually for the MWA to do. So you don't have to feel like you have to know what information technology should be recorded as. So that's the MWA has a responsibility when they get it to look through them. If you want to select it, that's great. And they just will confirm if you selected the right one, or they will switch it up. The date your budget form is completed or updated is really important to change that as you update it. Especially in the beginning, there's going to be going back and forth. And that's the one thing that we noticed is we would be sharing budgets, and some people would change the date and the file name, but a lot of times it's only one activity that gets changed. So if the vocational training activity did get changed, you would want to change the date on it, even if the whole, nothing else changed, just because then it's easier to ensure that we're all working with the same document and that we've got we know what was changed, especially if it goes back and forth. I'm going to quickly look to see about the updated dates to see what was changed. So again, in my red highlights here, so you're going to do all your math and it's going to be great. And you're going to come up here and this is going to be an odd number. And this happens. And this year I finally just said, okay, math can be perfect, but this is a budget. And I need even numbers to go, because this all rolls up to the state plan, and the state plan is based on a 50%, right? So when we cut it in half, I can't have 50 cents sitting out there, right? So it's just, we're going to tweak something and you're going to make this make sense. And because remember, this is just a budget. This isn't great accounting here. These numbers will also still add up and not look right. You will add something up because of rounding, right? So this isn't a document that, it's rounding something. So in the end, total program, I don't like the total program and total budgets, they need to be even numbers. So whatever you have to do to tweak it, it's fine. Nobody's looking at this stuff down to the dollar. So I did a little tweaking, and I'll show you one. So, and then the most important thing is if you say it's going to cost you $16,634 to deliver this component, you need to have that much non-federal down here. It's really important. And on the actual Excel spreadsheet, there's lots of little hints that you can touch, and you can see the hint, and it'll tell you, I will say that to make sure that these match. You can say 17, you can say 20,000. If you go over, that's fine. Nobody has to change this to get it to match. It just cannot be lower. We're asking you to tell us what your non-federal sources are, but we're not asking you to say how much is coming from, you know, who, it doesn't matter. Just the MWA needs to know that this is where they can expect to see. If that changes throughout your fiscal year, you'll be communicating with the MWA that, you know, your non-federal sources have changed, but they'll expect to see this on your invoices down the road, you know, those type of fundings. I am not, this is made up data, right? So I'm just going to give you, so we do have the term instructor in here. And that, like Kate had mentioned, if you're doing tuition, you wouldn't be putting an instructor in here. So these are the positions, their salary, cost, fringe benefit, the potential, the, you know, basis for what percentage of an FTE that is. There's where I want to stop that conversation, because that I'm not familiar with, but that the fiscal people will, right? The percentage of the FTE that portion of the salary represents. This one's pretty basic. You just got your facility costs and communications costs, inside facility expenses. I think everybody's seen this before: material, supplies, contracted services, direct and percentage base. So it's really important that if you're putting, you know, that when you're doing this, this may impact your indirect costs. Not everything in here will necessarily be, you know, part of the value for your indirect cost rate. The only thing I really want to point the thing to, and I think I pointed out before, is staff travel and training. It's really important. It's only supporting FA&T plus. It's not, you know, professional development. It's just, we have monthly meetings. You're welcome to put in your salary base for attending monthly meetings. Your MWA will have meetings potentially. So there are some training opportunities and some, you know, staff time for meetings that you can put in, but it does need to be just for this program. The indirect costs, what I put down here, is really just to get you thinking. We've had indirect costs come in over the years that just didn't make sense. So they would have an indirect cost value that ended up being greater than it even mathematically could be. So this is just a way to kind of look at it. This is, all this is doing is it is calculated what the total, this 14,667, it's done it based on program delivery costs. So if you decide, if you want to say that, yes, my total program delivery costs of 14,667 are going to be part of my indirect, you can just take this value. All I'm saying is you can't select a value higher than that. Can't select a value higher than that. But you may find that, guess what? Some of these costs are not going to apply, should not apply to your indirect cost rate. A lot of times indirect costs, you know, will be salaries. Okay, so maybe some of this stuff doesn't. So all I'm saying is you don't have to use this figure. You just can't put a figure larger than that in there. So you would just put whatever you believed was supposed to be the basis for your indirect costs. You would put in your percentage. Obviously that's just the typical, but if you have a federally approved indirect cost rate, you would put in your federally approved indirect cost rate there, and it would calculate. And that's the value that's going to go up to the top. So it's important that you look at that, and because you can see it right here, the 1467 populated up top. So you get to determine what that value is, though, to start with.
And Lisa, can I underscore that too? That charging the full federally negotiated indirect rate on the line items per your approved cost study. So every college's is very different. Yeah. And some of the colleges we worked with had like some of the benefits were included and some weren't. So their fiscal folks had to actually calculate that out. And then we did have to provide proof of that every year. But I do want to really encourage colleges, like, charge your full federally negotiated indirect rate, because that is the cost incurred to run the program. This is different than other grants where usually you end up not doing that because it takes money away from actually running the program, right? Like we used to do that. If we charged 32.3% on our like limited Department of Labor grant, that took away a significant amount of money we needed for staffing. This is the opposite. So you charge the full rate because that's what it costs to run the program at your college, and you get more reimbursement back that then can come into serving the students. So it's different than most thinking around grants. And so that took some clarification too, because in my experience, a lot of our grants would be capped around 10% of the indirect rate we'd actually take for labor just to be able to do the work. So this is the opposite of that. And that is, we spent a lot of time getting this all approved with FNS. And really making clear that all of the funding that was part of an indirect rate and where that went was not federal. So it's well established, but that's a piece there really wanted to highlight. And then the same thing that you said, Lisa, about like, this is a budget, it's not actuals. This is also different than most grant budgets. And so it's important to communicate to your fiscal folks, and that, you know, when would submit a Department of Labor grant or a DOE grant or Perkins, right? Like you need to be pretty exact, and you need to stay like that is a very tight budget you need to stay to. This was different, and it's, you know, it's anticipating what you're going to spend more so it's like a projection. So it's just different than usual budgeting. Certainly you want to try to stick to it, and there are some, you know, you can't just move cost categories all over the place, and it is just different than a lot of other grants. So I think that's important to understand too, because that took some of the pressure off when trying to budget, because it's really hard the first year to project for sure what you're going to spend, because it's based on reimbursement, right? And it's based on how many people you serve and who comes in. So just know that, like, we were wildly off the first year. We worked with DHS, adjusted it, and then we were on target the rest of the year, but wanted to provide that added context too.
Yes, thank you. And we just had a conversation earlier this week, I believe, with a provider that said the very same thing. Well, they have quite a large indirect cost rate, and they were like, well, I would never charge that out. And yes, so that's perfect. Thank you, because you're right. This isn't taking away from the dollars that you can use to serve, you know, or provide the services that your contract, you know, with somebody would be for. This is what it costs, so you should. And I think that in the budgets, you're not going to cut, I don't know how many people are really going to hit their budget exact, right? I mean, that's not the point. What we really try to do, the most important thing with these budgets is, well, I'm going to stop there. I'm going to just finish this up, and then I'm going to go to that topic. So how I told you earlier that there's a separate tab for supportive services. If everybody is going to be provided supportive services, or you can leave it in its own tab. But if there is an activity that only those students would be getting, if they were enrolled in this activity, would they be getting that type of supportive service? Then you need to put it down here and just put it within that activity. Transportation is probably a really bad example here, because that could be given to all of the customers that they're going to serve, all of the students. But each activity you can designate supportive services, but you do not have to do it by activity. So all this does is it takes the activity, it takes everything from down below, puts it here. You've got your program, you've got your supportive service, your total budget, the anticipated amount of unique individuals that you're going to serve are 5, and it takes it to the front page. That's all, everything goes here to the front page. So we've got that 16,634. If we come back to the front page, we can see that sitting down here, right down here at the bottom, we can see the vocational 16. Well, you have to add your $500, but you can see the values there. They're broken out by supportive service. Total is going to be adding in the other activity here, which was the work readiness activity. So again, there's a work readiness activity, and it goes by the same thing. I don't know. Yeah, and we actually had some supportive services again, I did transportation. There's no need to put transportation in each activity. It could just go out into, you know, all 7 people, all 7 students. You could just have transportation here for the 7 students and keep it simple that way. That's totally acceptable. Everybody looks at it differently, how they want to do it, and that is fine. So now I have to go back to what it was. Okay, so the budget, so what we had in the beginning when we had these budgets, everybody brings them in, and I think I told you guys last month that it's just what we're projecting, and more important, when we project it and it goes into the state plan, that's DHHS asking FNS to basically front the money, put it in their bank account so that we can spend it, right? So they're going to send down 50%. It's going to sit in the bank account for us to spend. What we don't want to do is ask them for more than we need. So I think that's the only thing I caution people when they're doing this, is that we really think about a budget that's realistic for what our students, especially in the beginning, like Kate says, until you kind of get a grasp of it. And so don't feel like you have to go too high. Even if in some, and one college's budget is a little too small for them, they under budgeted, we look at the funding throughout the state. So there's room for us at the state to move money around. Maybe somebody else budgeted too much and they're just not getting the participation that they'd expected. So we don't have to go back to FNS. You know, we just move the funding around. So we tended in the beginning to say that we could do more than we could, and then we ended up giving money back, which, you know, nobody really wants to have to do that. So keep it this way. You can monitor your progress to spending. And if it looks like each MWA would be watching, if it looks like, oh goodness, you're going to hit your goal and you're only halfway through, maybe we need to rethink your goal. This is something that you can do throughout the fiscal year and go, oh, okay, you know, and that does happen. Or you're halfway through your fiscal year and you're like, we're just not finding the participants, so we're not spending, you know, and being upfront with it so that maybe they would allocate the funding to somebody else if we needed it, because we would prefer to do that than going back and asking. We're not going to go back and ask for money for one entity when we've got others that haven't been able to spend it. So this is a starting point, you know, and especially in the first time you do it, it's truly a starting point that we just work together with to hopefully get it to be something that each year you can add to and, you know, but knowing that you've got the participants lined up to be able to serve. And this is all subject to getting participants. And that's what we have to remember, that it's okay. Like, you're not going to know in the beginning. So, all right, Kate, I think I am done with this. You can take it away from here. And if there's any questions, I can certainly try to answer.
Any questions? Okay, Jose.
Quick theoretical question. In a best case scenario where everybody went under budget, or at least like, you know, like didn't try to overestimate, and everybody meets their targets and goes over their targets, is there any issue to you going back to FNS and asking for additional funding for drawdowns from the 50/50?
I think the only issue would be timing, right? So I think it's really important for the MWAs and the state, you know, we kind of watch to see what the MWAs are drawing down in funds to reimburse. And if it looks like, you know, that everybody is going to need more money, we just want to get that in as quickly as possible, because that will require a state plan amendment. So, and then FNS does have 30 days to review the amendment. So, and it takes time to get the amendment written and approved by leaderships through MDHHS before it can even go. So it's just a timing issue. We've done state plan amendments. We did one this year that fortunately we didn't have to ask for funding. So those are done much quicker.
Thank you.
Precious?
Lisa, I apologize if you mentioned this already. Which form or is there one of the tabs that you went over that colleges are responsible for submitting each month? Because I know the
Oh.
overall budget is submitted annually. What do they
Yeah,
submit each?
so this is your budget, which is just submitted annually. It is just to say, this is what I want to offer. This is what I think it's going to cost me. Based on these number of students, this is what's going to cost me to deliver this component. And that's what we review to do the state plan, to get approval, to get them up and running as a provider. So once and that will be done in each year that you want to be a provider. So once you become a provider, starting October 1 is our fiscal year. Once you become a provider, then you will bill the MWA. At this point, policy stands that you bill your MWA monthly. It also says that you provide your invoice to your MWA by the 10th of the following month, right? So there is discussion right now about, and that's what we want to talk with the colleges too. We want to have this conversation. Does that make sense for a college to bill monthly? Is there a better rotation, based on semesters, quarters, however it works, and then you would invoice at that time frame. So I think we do need to discuss that to see how that needs to be adjusted. There's also some possibility of changing the 10th of the month. We've talked, I think, on this meeting, maybe even last month, that it doesn't always work that we get the data and we have everything ready to invoice by the 10th of a month, right? So could we push that to the 20th of the month or something before we have to get all of our data to the MWA for invoicing? So this is definitely a time to think about it, but whatever it is, it's the invoice process that is going to be either monthly or quarterly to get your reimbursement.
Okay.
The budget is yearly.
How soon after the invoice is submitted do the colleges receive the refund?
By policy, they must receive their refund in 60 days.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions before we do some quick breakout groups? Okay, so we are going to move into breakout groups, and we know we are missing some of the colleges. There are some conflicts today, but still wanted to put you into breakout groups for probably about 10 minutes. And mostly it's just to provide some space and the time here so you can talk about next steps, any of the planning and proposals or questions that are coming up. So we're going to pair, Mark has paired MWA and colleges regionally. There's project team folks mixed throughout. Mark and I will stay in the main room if there's questions, but really wanted you to take the chance if there's questions that came up you want to talk through in a small group. And then also just, we know if you need to set up some meetings or next steps, like just take this time to do that. And hopefully it'll, I think I've always appreciated if there's time to get some things done during meetings instead of leaving meetings with a big list of things to do. So wanted to give you that space where you can collaborate and identify things going forward. So any other context, Mark, that you want to offer?
No, I tried to mix up folks from ACCT, SJI, and the state offices with Leo and DHHS and beyond. And so hopefully I got it right. If you end up in a group, if you're from an MWA or a college and you're in the wrong one, then just come back to the main room. We'll get you into the right one. But I do have one group with West Michigan Works, and I'm not sure if we have anyone from GRCC, and then one with Mott, Muskegon, and GST, and then one with Macomb and Macomb St. Clair. And I think I put if anyone's from DESC there as well.
We just chased them all away.
Mark,
Thank you. I'm in the meeting.
Matt would go with West
Oh,
Michigan,
there you
or
go.
excuse me,
I
Muskegon
said
would
I'm
go
in
with
the
West
meeting.
Michigan Works.
Muskegon would go.
I'm in the meeting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, I don't need those. You got the lightly salted roughly ones. Where'd you go to the far away one?
Okay, I will send
Okay,
you
yeah,
off.
go ahead.
I appreciate everyone getting a chance to chat here. And we'll have about 10 minutes.
I don't know why I'm on this. They don't even want to do this program.
Sarah, I think, yeah, just mute.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Hopefully that was helpful. And we are now going to turn it over to Steve and whoever else on team to talk about some of the resources as like you're thinking about submitting the proposal, putting the budget together, other considerations for developing that and setting your program up for success.
Thanks, Kate. And this is a very timely conversation because in our breakout room, we were discussing the same exact thing. And so I just wanted to share some additional resources, talk a little bit about what they're designed to do, and then talk a little bit about sort of taking advantage of additional technical assistance. So I'm going to share my screen if I have, this should work. All right, hopefully you're looking at our provider readiness roadmap. Can everyone see? Okay, perfect. So this is a SJI was the primary developer of this, and then we provided some feedback, and APHSA put some things together, and we did one for community action agencies, or they did one for them as well. But you know, so we wanted to take what colleges were experiencing, kind of break out different aspects of it to sort of give that roadmap or those guidelines in order to become a provider. So it's broken into 3 parts, and part 1 is basically just to help determine if Snap ENT is a good fit for you. Now, keep in mind that there's going to be overlap with what we're doing, with what the Michigan project is covering. So I don't want you to think like we're trying to supplant information or tell you something different. What we want to do is we're all moving in the same direction. We want to be on the same page. These are just additional resources. And then what we hope to do is after or during the series that we're participating in currently is take that information, and then what we want to do with our technical assistance is apply it to your individual campus. And so what we're talking about with Kate and Mark and everyone else is, how Michigan operates statewide, MWAs, those types of things. But what does it look like on your actual campus? And I think, we want you to take advantage of that. Our project is ending August 30th, so there is a bit of a time consideration around this. So, in our breakout session, it was communicated that the institution wasn't quite ready for this fiscal year, but that's fine. We want to get the institutions ready when they're ready. So we want you to take advantage of these opportunities with Susan and the rest of SJI's team to, move towards the goal of becoming a provider. So part 1 is essentially determining a good fit. It discusses the 4 key Snap ENT provider elements, which, talking around internal and external alignment, understand how state and counties systems operate, looking to identify alignment with, providers, both inside your organization and outside. And then we have, this is part 3, and hopefully you're seeing part 2 up. And so part 2 is designed to help you get ready to actually go through the application process. So part one, you've aligned yourself, you figured out, yes, here's my funds, here's how we're going to do it, here's what programs we're going to offer. Now, what does the actual application look like? So we talk about developing that initial budget, contracting with the agency. In this case, it would be the MWAs. And then like, what does that onboarding process look like? And then the last roadmap is, once you're a provider, which we know everyone here is going to be, because it's too good of an opportunity to pass up. This is designed to take you through that first year and sort of what happens after you become a provider. It's looking at reassessing those external factors. Have things changed? Have you figured out different processes? What does the internal alignment look like? Is the funding streams, have they changed? What's the capacity look like? Sort of taking that opportunity to, you've become a provider, you're in your first year, what do we need to tweak? And then looking at a continual improvement process. So, we hope these resources will be available. Jose, if you haven't done it already, is going to drop the link into the chat. And then, like I said, please, work with us, take the opportunity to work with us to apply what Kate and her team have put together, but then also, what does that look like on the ground at your institution? And I don't know if Jose or Susan or anyone wants to add anything.
I think you pretty well covered it.
And the only thing I would add just real quick around the because I think by now many of the institutions in the room at least have heard about many of the basics and the foundations on SNAP ENT. So you're probably past part one of the roadmap in terms of figuring out what, if it's feasible or not for your map, for your institution, and if it's not feasible, what do you need to do to get there. A lot of you probably around part number 2. And I just want to reiterate what Steve said, is like, we're here to help in that part number 2 and helping you iron out the kinks and figure out what it is. And in particular, especially with the project we have that's finding now, we have the ability to do those one-on-one coaching sessions. And what's beautiful about this convening is that you can hear directly from the MWAs what are some of the areas where they still have concerns or questions or things that need to get a little bit more clarification. So then we can take that back into our one-on-one coaching sessions and figure out what are ways that you can address those things. So you can get to the part where the MWAs want it to be, and then, or get the MWAs the information they need in the way that would be helpful to get clarity. So definitely encourage you to go through those.
Hey, I just wanted to add, in our session, it did come up that our MWA, or excuse me, the community college may not be quite ready. So they were asking about the time frame. So what I'm suggesting is 2 months prior to your semester or your next session starting is when the information, the proposal should be ready to go to the state. So if you can kind of use that as a basis, so you can, you don't have to start at the beginning of the fiscal year. That's what the amendment process is about. But your MWA will want to have the completed packet 2 months prior to your the month that you want to start. And what we found is it really works best for a new company or new, in this case, the colleges to piecemeal it a little bit. Don't worry, that the MWA doesn't have to have a complete packet to put together to send to the state. Let's send up, like, here's the budget. This is what we're thinking. Let's look at this. Let's look, and go through those documents as you feel that they're ready. The MWA feels they're ready. They know that they can send them up and have a kind of a preview check and have conversation around it. So hopefully that would be helpful too, to not make it think, everything has to be perfect and ready to go.
That's a really great flag too, I think, Lisa, because that was one of the things I think we realized is, when you're leveraging staff time and effort, so you're getting reimbursed for your time and effort to serve the program, that also includes building the program. So I think that took a while for some of the colleges to realize, it took a while for us to realize that it wasn't just direct student service. You could also be reimbursed for the time that's spent to develop the plan, the partnerships, the infrastructure. So that was really important for a number of colleges to realize, like, get on contract now and start building this out, because it takes a while to get momentum. That came up in another state where the human services said to the college who's going to serve as an intermediary, like, we want you on contract because you're doing all this work with us and with your other colleges, and you're not getting any funding for that. So let's get you on contract. We know you're not ready to go and start serving students next month, but we want to be working with you and for you to start building up that reimbursement. So just keep that in mind too. It's not the time and effort is for supporting the program. So you need to be very clearly able to point to what you're doing in that program. But as we all know, there's a lot that involves in ramping up a grant or a program. And so you can capture that. You just need to make sure it's really clear that that's the funding that you're using for that time is not federal in source, not matched elsewhere, and that you can point to what you're doing for the program. So just want to provide that encouragement when we didn't feel like we were ready. None of the other colleges really felt like we were ready to go, but we kind of just jumped in and were really successful because we made it a priority. And so I think just want to add that encouragement as well. So for the last few minutes, just want to go over a couple next steps and point to a couple of resources. So I'd absolutely encourage you to take advantage of working with ACCT and SJI team. That was huge for the success in building it out. The other piece I wanted to flag is 2 other resources that are coming out from partners. And so one is TICAS, which is the Institute for College Access and Success, has a paper coming out next year. Carrie Welton, who has worked at the Hope Center and then also at CLASP, and also has experience as a young parent who navigated through benefits in college, has a paper coming about reimagining SNAP. So really thinking about how SNAP can be a tool both to address basic needs and security of students, but also a college access tool. So that will be coming out, and there's a webinar that's coming out next week, and there's a webinar March 28th. And then Kale, partners from SJI, so some of Susan's colleagues, Bree Wynn and Natasha Richardson, have a webinar through Kale that is coming out. Or it's Natasha Bennett, right? Did I say that right? I don't know why I always say it. It's Natasha Bennett. So I saw that expression. So they have a webinar coming out about just student-centered design and how some of the work that they've done. As we worked with Bree and Natasha really closely at PCC on a benefit access project that was about student-centered design that really informed how we approached outreach and student enrollment and retention services. And they have also done a lot of work so broadly looked at benefit access, basic needs and security, and how to increase college access and center equity. And then they also did some really involved work with our STEP college. Thanks, Mark, for putting that link in. So would really encourage you to tune in because it was really, really informative. And both Bree and Natasha are also really aware of SNAP ENT, so that won't be just around ENT, but they have that really good lens. And then now that I've got the names corrected, Susan, don't want to add anything?
I just can't say enough about my colleagues, Bree and Natasha, and the work they do about, centering student voice. And it's such a key piece of SNAP ENT, because what we know often is one of the big struggles that colleges have, or they say, is that we can't find participants. And so connecting people to basic needs, really hearing about what their needs are, is such a key piece of SNAP ENT. So I just really highly recommend the webinar, and props to my colleagues because they're fantastic.
Yeah, would absolutely. And I will say, we never had a problem with enrollments. So I think that we really centered this, but I hear that in other states. I'm like, what? Like that was never, ever an issue for the colleges for things, but we really did try to center it and doing it very differently than had historically. And during the pandemic, when enrollments were declining at the colleges, sometimes up to 25% a term, ours were consistently increasing. So just really would say too, I think that's other thing for your college administrators to know, like this is an enrollment strategy and a retention strategy and a completion strategy too, if you need to really remind them of why this is a great opportunity for your college. So any other announcements for anyone before we just talk about kind of the last session? So I'll keep doing that. I'll put the recording of the meeting. I will put the resources into a folder for session 4. I'll add some additional Oregon resources in there. I'll put actually a sample of the college budget that we did, kind of what we were talking to, of how we took like the program budget and found a portion, so you can see what that looks like. And there's also some narrative of how we described what we were doing. So look at that. That went through a lot of rounds of editing over the years. And so got that pretty streamlined for FNS approval for the state plan. And then the last session, we will kind of wrap this up, sum it up of like, what's the last proposal? What does it actually look like to have a successful program, kind of the invoicing, and then just next steps going forward. So thank you all for your time, and look forward to the wrapping up this series, but also hopefully continuing to look at how this work can move forward and all the supports that are there for Michigan.
Kate, did you see there's one question real quick from Mary? What kind of numbers of students did you have in the first year?
Oh, I didn't. Very low the first year. Actually, I should say it was very low the first term. I think amongst the 6 colleges, we maybe served 3 students the first term, the first quarter, because we were spending so much time getting our just kind of the processes in line. But then I can look back because I'm actually not remembering, but we did end up really far exceeding all our numbers thereafter. It just took a while to get and take off, but I can get that information for you.
I was, oh.
Go, Susan.
Oh, I was saying, we were just reviewing, because we were talking about this related, but just in a different conversation. And I was looking at some numbers. I think that was from Chemeketa College, and like they just grew exponentially. Chemeketa is in Salem, Oregon, for everybody else. And like, yeah, people start out with, 10 or 20, maybe. Like that's a really normal number to start. But now over the last several years, they're at like 300 and something annually. So that's kind of the potential there. But yeah, like 10 is a very common number. I hear providers like saying they're going to start with.
Yeah, I was just gonna add, like, at least from the past 2 years, we're engaging with our cohort across 6 different states. For those that were already providers and that were being effective and very good with their programs, I think that was a very common trend. It's like they all started small, and you want them to start small because you want to make sure they iron out the kinks with processes and paperwork before they have too much and it overwhelms them. But once they have all of that down, and once students know that this opportunity exists and it's in place, that it grows.
All right. Yeah. So that's exactly, that was very much what I think we've seen. And so you'll start small, which is good to know, like you can get it to work and then it will grow hugely. So on that good note, hope you all enjoy your weekend, no storms, and for any of us, and we will see you next month.
Great job. Okay, did I hear you correct that colleges could apply to become a PLUS provider and the work that it takes to launch this program can be refunded,
Reimbursed.
reimbursed.
I'm just keeping you on track of the verbiage there. So,
So which one is
Yeah.
it? Because I got slapped on the
Reimbursed.
hand for saying reimbursed.
Really?
And yeah. So that's why I've been saying refund. Is it reimbursement?
It's a reimbursement model. That's
Okay.
what I've always called. Yeah, I've never heard the term refund. No.
Mhm.
So yeah, so I was glad, Kate, you brought up about get them on contract, right? I mean, this too is a bit outside my area, right? Like I don't normally speak to that, but you're right. I mean, I try to tell them any work that you're doing
Yeah.
to support the program you can bill for. But what I struggle with is, so this first summer, right? Doing
Mhm.
your
Yeah.
very first proposal, you can't bill for that.
No.
But
Yeah.
but you're not gonna, I'm glad you pointed out, you're not gonna have everything determined but by the start date. Like, you're gonna put a proposal in, your MWA is gonna submit it to me by June, we're gonna approve it, you're gonna get going. Some of that training, MWAs hopefully will start doing a little training. Maybe they won't. The college may say, I got a contract October 1. That's when you can come in here and start asking, to train. I mean, so I don't even really know how that works, but yeah, any of the training they're doing with the
Yeah.
onboarding, they should be charging out their staff time too.
Okay.
I don't
Yeah.
know how that really works, because here's the other negative. I don't see invoices. We don't see invoices because they're at the MWA level. This is, I think, one of the reasons why we're a little slower at this is, one, our full transparency, everybody knows, we don't, across the board, fiscal is not really part of the conversation enough. So you don't have fiscal at, standing up. And then there, with that other layer, I think the MWAs are very cautious about what they bill, well, they don't have anything to bill because they don't have any money to run the program. So they're probably really cautious because, again, this is not the way they do business.
Yeah.
They use competitive grants. That's what they do. This idea of charging out for what you actually spend is so foreign in this environment. So, Kate, that was great to mention that. Now I just wish we met, the MWAs who were listening are going to be like, what's that really mean? Which is good.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and so that's why I think since you put it out there, you're open for more than monthly billing, right?
Yes.
So this is what was really helpful for us and for DHS, because this was different for them when they were doing it too, is like we did quarterly billing. And then what that allowed is like, we were like, we have to at least have one person enrolled in the quarter, right?
Yeah.
When colleges were ramping up, like, let's get one student that we've served in something, but that gave 3 months time to get like trainings and the forms and all the meetings and all of that. And then it could just be that, there was one student that I think one college did just have one student that like they actually did the referral into, right? Some of the colleges started off with like 20 right away. Like it varied, and it did vary, like the colleges that have, joined alongside another one. Like the early adopters will probably have very few, but then other colleges, once they see what other Michigan colleges are doing it, they'll be fine. But I also think that's a really good way that like, they're just everyone's used to thinking of traditional grants, which is like, you get the grant and it started like, you got notified with federal grants, like, oh, you started October 1 and it's December. And so you're behind and you're like in this like immediate, it's just a different mind frame that folks don't kind of know how to trust. And you don't get paid for training and building stuff up and planning periods generally, right? So yeah.
And you don't, in that, you're conserving your grant to make, so your thought process too is conserving that grant to be able to make sure you have funding for participants who come in 6 months from now, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I know, I can't remember, it was GST that we met a couple times recently, and one of their providers has like a 43% indirect cost rate.
Great.
And I was like, yeah, you can use it. You know, then I'm like, so I was glad you said that, because I was like, all right, where did I find that? Where was
Yeah.
it?
Yeah.
But I said, you just have to have proof of it. And
Yeah.
I also thought, and Kate, you might know this, I thought FNS required them to use it.
Yeah. They
Like,
have, you
they have
to,
to, right?
yeah. If you're going to use
Yeah.
indirect, you either have to use de minimis or your full federally negotiated indirect rate.
But could you use the 10%? So you just made it sound like it could be an or, and I almost thought I heard somebody say that, no, if you have a
Oh,
federally approved, you
yeah,
must
no,
use it.
I'm sorry. I meant like first, there are some smaller colleges who didn't actually have, who don't have
Right.
a federally
Oh, yeah.
negotiated indirect rate. And so they had to use the 10%,
Yes,
but
okay.
others could not. Yeah. But
Okay,
then-
because that's what the guy said to me. He goes, well,
Yeah.
I, like you, he goes, I don't use it. And I said, I think you have to.
Yeah.
But I was looking for my email from like one of the FNS staff that I know they told, maybe I read it in something, because I'm like, no, I think, and I said, and don't feel bad, because that's what you're supposed. But see, this whole thing about like tuition and what goes into tuition, so don't bill for tuition, because if tuition is your instructor time and, you know, faculty time, fiscal needs to be at the table for this. That's not me,
Yeah.
right? Like, I'm
I
hoping
didn't
they're
know
at the
that
table.
either. It sounds like a new language to me when you
Yeah,
guys are
it is.
talking about indirect costs.
Oh.
What is an indirect cost for a
So-
college?
So this was for me too, like, and I just worked with the accountant. So basically someone in the fiscal office does a study, like an indirect
Mhm.
study. And I have no idea, like there's these crazy spreadsheets and they go around and they determine what are general services that support the college. And they have this really long study, indirect cost study. It seems super random what each college decides to put in it or not. And it's usually some random accounting person, frankly, who does it. So it's kind of their own thing. And then they submit it to like Health and Human Services and it gets approved. And so like but people need to know what's in it. And this does come up because like at PCC, we actually like they don't include the contract grants and accounting people. So we could charge all of their time. Some colleges do. But it's like the cost of like the library. It's like the equivalent of like the operating costs to like a CDO. Keep it up and running. And there's kind of like core staff, like presidents are usually in that indirect cost. The library, the tutoring center, like not advisors, but different kind of pieces there.
Okay,
Yeah.
so they get 10% of the indirect costs?
So they take that, so whatever they determine, like in Iowa, it's easier. So like our fiscal staff, our accounting staff, our monitoring staff, they a lot of times are charged because they go across all programs. They provide services to all programs or all students in what she's saying. And so they say, okay, we've determined that, yeah, we're going to say we got a 20% indirect cost rate. But like she said, there's certain categories they can charge that on. So a lot of times it is salaries that you could charge it on. And that's one of the basic, but you can't do it on any direct cost. It is an indirect cost rate. So if you have a specific cost that you charge to that grant, you then don't add an indirect cost rate to it. You already charge out, but again, I mean, I went down to our monitoring staff years ago to kind of get that. And she's since retired, not even our fiscal staff, but I mean, our fiscal staff, but not, our monitoring staff. And I had wrote it up on what it is, but that's why I had to put, like, I was getting budgets in that the 10